Yuki-Onna by Lafcadio Hearn. In a village of Musashi province, there lived two woodcutters, Mosaku and Minokachi. At the time of which I am speaking, Mosaku was an old man, and Minokachi, his apprentice, was a lad of 18 years. Every day they went together to a forest situated about 5 miles from their village. On the way to that forest there is a wide river to cross, and there is a ferry boat. Several times a bridge was built where the ferry is, but the bridge was each time carried away by a flood. No common bridge can resist the current there when the river rises. Mosaku and Minokachi were on their way home, one very cold evening, when a great snowstorm overtook them. They reached the ferry, and they found that the boatman had gone away, leaving his boat on the other side of the river. It was no day for swimming, and the woodcutters took shelter in the ferryman's hut, thinking themselves lucky to find any shelter at all. There was no brazier in the hut, nor any place in which to make a fire. It was only a two-mat hut with a single door, but no window. Mosaku and Minokachi fastened the door, and lay down to rest, with their straw raincoats over them. At first they did not feel very cold, and they thought that the storm would soon be over. The old man almost immediately fell asleep, but the boy Minokachi lay awake a long time, listening to the awful wind, and the continual slashing of the snow against the door. The river was roaring, and the hut swayed and creaked like a junk at sea. It was a terrible storm, and the air was every moment becoming colder, and Minokachi shivered under his raincoat. But at last, in spite of the cold, he too fell asleep. He was awakened by a showering of snow in his face. The door of the hut had been forced open, and, by the snow light, Yuki-Akari, he saw a woman in the room, a woman all in white. She was bending above Mosaku, and blowing her breath upon him, and her breath was like a bright white smoke. Almost in the same moment she turned to Minokachi, and stooped over him. He tried to cry out, but found that he could not utter any sound. The white woman bent down over him lower and lower, until her face almost touched him, and he saw that she was very beautiful, though her eyes made him afraid. For a little time she continued to look at him, then she smiled, and she whispered, "I intended to treat you like the other man. But I cannot help feeling some pity for you, because you are so young. You are a pretty boy, Minokachi, and I will not hurt you now. But, if you ever tell anybody, even your own mother, about what you have seen this night, I shall know it, and then I will kill you. Remember what I say." With these words, she turned from him, and passed through the doorway. Then he found himself able to move, and he sprang up, and looked out. But the woman was nowhere to be seen, and the snow was driving furiously into the hut. Minokachi closed the door, and secured it by fixing several billets of wood against it. He wondered if the wind had blown it open. He thought that he might have been only dreaming, and might have mistaken the gleam of the snow light in the doorway for the figure of a white woman, but he could not be sure. He called to Mosaku, and was frightened because the old man did not answer. He put out his hand in the dark, and touched Mosaku's face, and found that it was ice. Mosaku was stark and dead. By dawn the storm was over, and when the ferryman returned to his station, a little after sunrise, he found Minokachi lying senseless beside the frozen body of Mosaku. Minokachi was promptly cared for, and soon came to himself, but he remained a long time ill from the effects of the cold of that terrible night. He had been greatly frightened also by the old man's death, but he said nothing about the vision of the woman in white. As soon as he got well again, he returned to his calling, going alone every morning to the forest, and coming back at nightfall with his bundles of wood, which his mother helped him to sell. One evening, in the winter of the following year, as he was on his way home, he overtook a girl who happened to be traveling by the same road. She was a tall, slim girl, very good-looking, and she answered Minokachi's greeting in a voice as pleasant to the ear as the voice of a songbird. Then he walked beside her, and they began to talk. The girl said that her name was Oyuki, that she had lately lost both of her parents, and that she was going to Yedo, where she happened to have some poor relations, who might help her to find a situation as a servant. Minokachi soon felt charmed by this strange girl, and the more that he looked at her, the handsomer she appeared to be. He asked her whether she was yet betrothed, and she answered, laughingly, that she was free. Then, in her turn, she asked Minokachi whether he was married, or pledged to marry, and he told her that, although he had only a widowed mother to support, the question of an honorable daughter-in-law had not yet been considered, as he was very young. After these confidences, they walked on for a long while without speaking, but, as the proverb declares, Kika ariba, ni mo kuchi hodo ni mano woyu, when the wish is there, the eyes can say as much as the mouth. By the time they reached the village, they had become very much pleased with each other, and then Minokachi asked Oyuki to rest a while at his house. After some shy hesitation she went there with him, and his mother made her welcome, and prepared a warm meal for her. Yuki behaved so nicely that Minokachi's mother took a sudden fancy to her, and persuaded her to delay her journey to Yedo. And the natural end of the matter was that Yuki never went to Yedo at all. She remained in the house, as an honorable daughter-in-law. Yuki proved a very good daughter-in-law. When Minokachi's mother came to die, some 5 years later, her last words were words of affection and praise for the wife of her son. And Yuki bore Minokachi 10 children, boys and girls, handsome children all of them, and very fair of skin. The countryfolk thought Yuki a wonderful person, by nature different from themselves. Most of the peasant women age early, but Yuki, even after having become the mother of 10 children, looked as young and fresh as on the day when she had first come to the village. One night, after the children had gone to sleep, Yuki was sewing by the light of a paper lamp, and Minokachi, watching her, said, "To see you sewing there, with the light on your face, makes me think of a strange thing that happened when I was a lad of 18. I then saw somebody as beautiful and white as you are now. Indeed, she was very like you." Without lifting her eyes from her work, Yuki responded, "Tell me about her. Where did you see her?" Then Minokachi told her about the terrible night in the ferryman's hut, and about the white woman that had stooped above him, smiling and whispering, and about the silent death of old Mosaku. And he said, "Asleep or awake, that was the only time that I saw a being as beautiful as you. Of course, she's not a human being, and I was afraid of her, very much afraid, but she was so white. Indeed, I have never been sure whether it was a dream that I saw, or the woman of the snow." Yuki flung down her sewing and arose, and bowed above Minokachi where he sat, and shrieked into his face, "It was I, Yuki, it was. And I told you then that I would kill you if you ever said one word about it. But for those children asleep there, I would kill you this moment. And now you had better take very, very good care of them, for if ever they have reason to complain of you, I will treat you as you deserve." Even as she screamed, her voice became thin, like a crying of wind, then she melted into a bright white mist that spired to the roof beams, and shuddered away through the smoke hold. Never again was she seen. Riki-Baka, by Lafcadio Hearn. His name was Riki, signifying strength, but the people called him Riki the Simple, or Riki the Fool, Riki-Baka, because he had been born into perpetual childhood. For the same reason they were kind to him, even when he set a house on fire by putting a lighted match to a mosquito curtain, and clapped his hands for joy to see the blaze. At 16 years he was a tall, strong lad, but in mind he remained always at the happy age of 2, and therefore continued to play with very small children. The bigger children of the neighborhood, from 4 to 7 years old, did not care to play with him, because he could not learn their songs and games. His favorite toy was a broomstick, which he used as a hobby horse, and for hours at a time he would ride on that broomstick, up and down the slope in front of my house, with amazing peals of laughter. But at last he became troublesome by reason of his noise, and I had to tell him that he must find another playground. He bowed submissively, and then went off, sorrowfully trailing his broomstick behind him. Gentle at all times, and perfectly harmless if allowed no chance to play with fire, he seldom gave anybody cause for complaint. His relation to the life of our street was scarcely more than that of a dog or a chicken, and when he finally disappeared, I did not miss him. Months and months passed by before anything happened to remind me of Riki. "What has become of Riki?" I then asked the old woodcutter who supplies our neighborhood with fuel. I remembered that Riki had often helped him to carry his bundles. "Riki-Baka?" answered the old man. "Ah, Riki is dead, poor fellow. Yes, he died nearly a year ago, very suddenly. The doctors said that he had some disease of the brain. And there is a strange story now about that poor Riki. When Riki died, his mother wrote his name, Riki-Baka, in the palm of his left hand, putting Riki in the Chinese character, and Baka in kana. And she repeated many prayers for him, prayers that he might be reborn into some more happy condition. Now, about 3 months ago, in the honorable residence of Nanagashi-sama, in Kojimachi, a boy was born with characters on the palm of his left hand, and the characters were quite plain to read, Riki-Baka. So the people of that house knew that the birth must have happened in answer to somebody's prayer, and they caused inquiry to be made everywhere. At last a vegetable seller brought word to them that there used to be a simple lad, called Riki-Baka, living in the Eshigome quarter, and that he had died during the last autumn, and they sent 2 menservants to look for the mother of Riki. Those servants found the mother of Riki, and told her what had happened, and she was glad exceedingly, for that Nanagashi house is a very rich and famous house. But the servant said that the family of Nanagashi-sama were very angry about the word Baka on the child's hand. "And where is your Riki buried?" the servants asked. "He is buried in the cemetery of Zendoji," she told them. "Please to give us some of the clay of his grave," they requested. So she went with them to the temples and doji, and showed them Riki's grave, and they took some of the grave clay away with them, wrapped up in a furoshiki. They gave Riki's mother some money, 10 yen. But what did they want with that clay? I inquired. Well, the old man answered, you know that it would not do to let the child grow up with that name on his hand. And there is no other means of removing characters that come in that way upon the body of a child, you must rub the skin with clay taken from the grave of the body of the former birth.